health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show by any host or guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before beginning any new diet, exercise, or treatment program.
Welcome to the Accelerated Health TV and Radio Show. I'm your host, Sara Banta. I'm a wife, a busy mom of 3, and the founder of the cutting-edge supplement brand, Accelerated Health Products. This podcast is more than just a source of information. It's a community for you and for those looking to optimize their health. I release new episodes every Monday and Tuesday, and a bonus one on Thursday. So remember to subscribe and add to your playlist so you never miss a show. And join my free group coaching on Telegram. There is no downside. I teach you on a daily basis, and you can ask your questions, and I'm right there 7 days a week. The details can be found on my website, sarabantahealth.com. My goal is to reach everyone who needs me with the message of healing. So help me with this goal. Share this podcast with a few of your friends and loved ones, and together we will empower each other on our journey to optimal health. And I wish I had this forum 20 years ago. We have Dr. Felice Gersh back on, and we are talking about PCOS, which is the number one cause of infertility. It wreaked havoc in my body when I was trying to get pregnant. God blessed me with 3 kids, unbeknownst, despite all of the uphill battles I was going against. And we can talk more about that. But we've got Dr. Gersh back on, and she is one of the very first dual board certified integrative gynecologists in the United States. She's got some books out there. We're going to talk all about it. Welcome, Dr. Gersh. How are you today?
Well, I'm great, and it's wonderful to be back. And of course, like we said before we started, talking about one of my favorite topics, PCOS.
It is. And you know what? When I started getting pregnant, you get married and then you have this fear. Every woman has this fear, like, oh my gosh, am I going to be able to have those babies that I want and I've dreamed of forever? And it actually hit me. I had trouble getting pregnant, and they said, well, you've got PCOS, but you don't look like the typical person with PCOS, because most people are obese with PCOS, and we can talk all about that. But I had all the symptoms, the hair falling out, the acne, the irregular periods. I thought the irregular periods were because I was an athlete for so long. So there's all of this misconceptions about this disease, if you call it that. So I want to talk about, because we have so much to get into, being diagnosed with PCOS. It is not a death sentence, people. I've got 3 beautiful kids. They're thriving, right? So it is a condition, and it's treatable. And if I had known back then what I know now, I would have had no issues getting pregnant. So, Dr. Gersh, where do we start?
Well, I love your story. It really is so common in the sense that you thought it might be like the equivalent of, if not a death sentence, a death fertility sentence. And I hear that all the time from patients who are told, oh, you have PCOS, you won't be able to conceive. Or even if you do, you're not going to have healthy children, you're going to miscarry, you're going to have pregnancy complications. And that doesn't have to be your destiny. That it is a label that is assigned based on what a committee of doctors came up with as meeting certain criteria, which I'll tell you in a moment. And then from there, you go and you start working on the really viable solutions so that you can have the optimal life. You can actually optimize your fertility, and almost every single one of my PCOS patients conceives naturally, and the ones who don't, because nothing's 100%, if they go and get some fertility drugs or even IVF, they are dramatically more likely to be successful. But it's not going to just happen if you don't do all the work. I mean, it is not a simple matter to really turn it around. So you have to be dedicated to the cause, and you have to expect more than just a magic pill, or even what now is often looked at as the magic shot, the GLP-1 agonists, which have certain potential good and bad things about them. And so really, it's so important to understand the underlying mechanisms of PCOS so that you can then actually do what is necessary to really turn things around. And that's why I love to talk about it, because it is a syndrome. And as such, it's a sort of a hodgepodge of symptoms, but that's not telling you about etiologies. And that's where functional medicine, which is part of what I do with integrative medicine, looking at underlying root causes, is really what it's all about coming up with the most viable solutions.
So I didn't get diagnosed until I was trying to get pregnant, and that's normal, right? Most people with PCOS don't get diagnosed until they're actually trying. And my doctor just said, you need to be on Clomid. That's your solution. There's no nutritional changes you need to make. There's nothing else, right? That's not what they do. They give you the drug to get you pregnant. They don't take care of the root cause like you're talking about.
Right.
But let's talk about the criteria. What should women be looking for as signs that they possibly have PCOS?
Well, the official criteria is not what everyone who actually agrees, everyone doesn't agree with them. But the official is that you need 2 of the following 3. And this is as an adult. This would be like from around over 18 on. So there's different criteria for adolescents. But for an adult, you have to have 2 of the following 3. You have to have messed up periods, so some kind of irregular cycle or none at all. And you need to have ultrasound imaging showing multiple tiny little cysts around the cortex or the outer rim of the ovaries, and or an elevated, this is a new added part of the diagnosis, anti-Mullerian hormone. So that's a measurable by a blood test, a hormone that's produced by ovaries, and that would be excessively elevated. Or the last criteria, which most of us feel should be part of this, mandatory, it should not be optional, is evidence of androgen excess, either clinically or on lab testing. And that would be like high levels of testosterone. And that's what it's talking about, testosterone. And there's an adrenal androgen, which actually can give very similar look, but it's once again, an underlying etiology that's different, although they can overlap too. So it can be kind of complex, but you would have as manifestations of androgen excess. And you mentioned some of them, like you would have what's called androgenic alopecia, so really thinning and very of the hair on the head and very fine hairs, and ultimately patches where it's like not really patches per se, but areas where you have a lot of part showing, because you can see a lot of scalp. So you have very thin hair and just less hair. And then cystic acne, they sometimes call it hormonal acne, tends to be on the jawline, and they're deep cysts, painful, scarring. They can give like pitting and all kinds of scarring from the acne. And that's really terrible. And then also excessive hirsutism, particularly like facial hair, like you have to shave or you have to have a lot of laser treatments. Sometimes excessive, like not just on the face, but like body hair. So you have a lot of hairy legs and arms even, and that type of thing. So these are like very, we'll say, esteem lowering kinds of symptoms, for a woman who is like going into her late teens and 20s, and she's embarking on her career and looking for potentially her perfect match in life, and then starting a family, to have these kinds of symptoms. And as you mentioned, it's not part of the diagnosis, but 80% of women with PCOS also suffer from obesity, which it's like fuel to the fire, all of that excessive adipose tissue. So it's just really a life-altering condition, which can change how a woman looks at herself, her self-esteem, and the choices she makes in life. So it's really important to get on it early. The earlier you make the diagnosis, the better. But whatever point in life you're at, there's an enormous amount that you can do. And it goes way beyond, if you're not trying to get pregnant, just going on the standard treatment, which hasn't changed in like decades, which is birth control pills, metformin, and then plus minus spironolactone. I mean, that doesn't make sense from dealing with the root cause at all, because birth control pills, by their very nature, are pro-inflammatory. And the bodies of women with PCOS have a lot of underlying chronic inflammation that's driving insulin resistance and weight gain and mood disorders and just other things like general aches and pains, arthritis, and so on. So we definitely want to do more, as well as, I know this you deal with all the time, working on the gut microbiome. Unfortunately, hormonal contraceptives don't fix the gut microbiome. They can actually contribute to making it more abnormal or dysbiotic and increase the risk for developing autoimmune thyroid, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is way higher in women with PCOS. So what my goal is, and working with individuals like you, patients can really see tremendous results, is always start with lifestyle first. And so first you have to define the problem, then you can find solutions that not just sometimes cover up symptoms. And I can't argue that birth control pills can sometimes cover up symptoms, but they're not actually getting to the underlying issues. And if you want to get pregnant and you go off of them, you're going to have to face the music, only it could even be worse music, more discordant music at the time you go off of them, because now you've altered your estrogen receptors, which already have problems, and so on. So we really want to try to find solutions that go to the root cause. And that's really been my emphasis.
Yeah. And so three things that you touched on that I want to make sure we dive into. Okay. Number one, thyroid health. Your thyroid is the master endocrine gland. It controls your gonads. It controls your adrenals. So if your thyroid's not healthy, the stuff down there is not going to be so healthy either. So make sure you're taking care of your thyroid. And that is why we talk about the accelerated iodine and the accelerated thyroid. And I've had women and young women who have said, oh my gosh, my period came and it went, and I didn't have any PMS symptoms anymore. It was amazing. So I love that you talk about the thyroid. I want to get to the gut, but I really want to start with insulin resistance. Dr. Robert Lustig says that insulin resistance at the liver is fatty liver disease. Insulin resistance at the heart is heart disease. Insulin resistance at the ovaries is PCOS. So how much of that do you believe is true? And I want to get into the fact that insulin resistance isn't just about carbs, but other things that can contribute to it as well, which then can lead into things like PCOS.
Well, just as a slight diversion, just echoing what you said about thyroid, it's like everything in life. It's multidimensional, bidirectional. So it turns out that there are estrogen receptors on the thyroid gland, and there are thyroid receptors on the ovary. So it's like, talk about like chicken egg, it's like a feed forward thing. When one thing is wrong, the other one is going to be wrong. And then it makes the other one even more wrong, right? So, you got to work on all of the above, and which gets to the question you just asked about the insulin resistance and the ovary. So in what we'll say the classic PCOS, the starting point is actually the ovaries not producing the vital life hormone estradiol. So just so that people know, estrogen is not a hormone. It's a family of hormones, just like fat. What's fat? There's like different kinds of fats. People know that now, but they didn't know that. And years ago, it wasn't that many. They would demonize all fat, based on bad fat, like trans fat, manufactured fat. And now a lot of people are demonizing estrogen because of chemical, made up manufactured estrogens or imbalances based on metabolic dysfunction. But the estrogen that's naturally made by the ovaries is estradiol. And in order to make that particular estrogen, you need to have the first thing, which is made by the ovaries, which is testosterone. So all estradiol is derived from testosterone. So the ovaries, like an assembly line, the ovaries first make testosterone, and then it moves into the next phase of the assembly line, where an enzyme called aromatase comes into play and converts the testosterone into estradiol. Well, it turns out that women with the classic form of PCOS, which is like 80%, that their enzyme aromatase, for various and sundry reasons that can go back to in utero exposures to endocrine disruptors like plastics and these other chemicals that actually can change how your whole system develops right during the beginning. The whole endocrine system is a little bit off. And so this aromatase enzyme isn't working so as well. It does work. It doesn't as well as it should. So what happens is the brain, which has sensors to the estrogen, says, hey, ovaries, I need more estrogen. You're not making enough. So it puts out the signal, which goes to the pituitary, which then puts out the signal to the ovaries to make first more testosterone, and then to convert it to estradiol. But it's not doing that well. So it's kind of like a little glitch in the system. So you end up with too much testosterone and not enough estradiol. Well, it turns out that estradiol is also a master hormone. And it sets thyroid, it works on the gut microbiome, and it regulates insulin and glucose transporters. So what happens is when you don't have enough estradiol, you will, and this happens to women as they transition into menopause too, when it's different mechanism, but they both end up with a system, their body, without enough estradiol. Then you don't transport the glucose properly, adequately into the cells. And when you have too much glucose circulating, the body will respond through the pancreas to make more insulin. And then if the insulin isn't working optimally, and that can be related to more inflammation, it becomes like a whole circle of events, like a snowball type of thing, where you end up, when you don't have enough estradiol, it also alters the gut microbiome, and then you don't have the right microbes, and then you don't make the proper mucus protectant, and then you get impaired gut barrier or a leaky gut, and you have dysbiosis, and you have systemic inflammation. It's like a whole system of things that kind of go awry, and it's complex, which is why the conventional medical system doesn't want to deal with it, because you have to understand the role that estrogen in the form of estradiol plays throughout the entire body. And when you don't have enough, every system is impacted. And it's huge, the effect on inflammation, because every immune cell also has estrogen receptors, and they become more like I call them like weapons of mass destruction without actual having good control. So they produce more inflammatory products, inflammatory cytokines, and then that creates more insulin resistance. So you can see it's like another feed forward problem here. And then you have also problems with the ovaries. The ovaries themselves become inflamed. It's amazing. When they take out with little tiny needles, they can draw out fluid that surrounds the eggs. And they find that fluid, the follicular fluid, is infiltrated with all of these inflammatory cells. So yes, the ovaries then become more inflamed. They become more insulin resistant as well. But the initial problem in women with PCOS stems from having an inadequate conversion of testosterone into estradiol. And then to make matters worse, it turns out that due to our bodies living in these chemical soups of all these endocrine disruptors, or what they call like xenoestrogens, like fake estrogens that can interfere with normal estrogen signaling, the estrogen receptors are not working optimally either. So even the estrogen in the form of estradiol that's produced doesn't optimally like turn on the switches in the cells, because the receptor, just like insulin resistance, the insulin doesn't work optimally. So too, when you have like resistance of your estrogen receptors, the estrogen that you have doesn't work optimally either. So it's like a double whammy effect. And you end up with this very complex kind of conglomeration of symptoms where you have leaky gut, systemic inflammation, insulin resistance, like metabolic dysfunction. And that leads to infertility because the eggs are not in a good environment. And you have the problem with ovulation because you don't have the proper signaling through the pituitary, because in addition to not producing enough estradiol, you have problems with the other signaling hormone that comes from the pituitary, the follicle stimulating hormone, that you don't make enough of it to actually trigger the proper selection of the egg and shut down the anti-Mullerian hormone, which is what the hormone that recruits all the little follicles. That's why you end up with all these follicles around the cortex or rim, because you keep recruiting like the contestants in a beauty contest, and they're like all contestants, all these follicles, and they say, pick me. But nature has this special system with FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, to pick the egg that's like the special one that gets to actually ovulate. And that doesn't happen properly. So you just keep recruiting more follicles, but you don't pick the special one to ovulate because of the hormonal dysregulation. So you can see how it's very complicated, and not too many people get into the depth of it. But by understanding this, you can actually create a very in-depth and very appropriate, focused approach to treating women with PCOS.
So just everybody take a step back. I don't care if you're dealing with PCOS or heart disease or fatty liver. Just what Dr. Gersh was talking about, the intricacies of the way the body works. And it is complicated. It's not one medication that is going to take care of your fatty liver. It is not one medication that's going to take care of your heart disease. It is, everything is so interrelated, and it's a domino effect, and it's a feedback loop, and it's a double feedback loop. I mean, it is so intricate. Our bodies truly are a miracle. So that's why you want to get to the root cause, fix that, and everything will go away. And I bet for those of you that are obese or have fatty liver and PCOS, when you fix your hormones and your PCOS, the other things will probably take care of themselves as well, because they're all kind of related to that same root cause. Okay, so Dr. Gersh, you talked about how these xenoestrogens, I talk about in the last 4 years, hormonal imbalances have skyrocketed. Cancers have skyrocketed, chronic disease, and I'm sure you're seeing it. Infertility has skyrocketed. In my own home, I have 2 daughters, and their menstrual cycles, and I've talked about this. One of my daughters, her pain level every month went from a 3, like, I don't feel good, I'm still going to school, to a 12, where she literally said, Mom, will you hit me so I can pass out? I can't deal with this pain. Throwing up. Now, the good news is we've taken care of it through supplements, through frequency healing. She's able to deal with her hormones. My point is this new modern world that we're living in, with exponentially more radiation, exponentially more xenoestrogens, plastics, heavy metals, all of that stuff is disrupting everything in our body. Our hormones are backing up our liver, causing brain fog, causing all of these things, causing insulin resistance without even eating a morsel of chocolate. So with that being said, number one, I'm sure you're seeing more of this going on in the last 3 years than ever before. But number two, it is interesting that these xenoestrogens are causing more testosterone in people with PCOS, but then in some women, they're seeing estrogen dominance. Can you explain the difference and why the same source is causing 2 different outcomes in women?
Absolutely. So we'll say going back to the classic PCOS woman who has a problem in the conversion of her ovarian produced testosterone into ovarian produced estrogen, which is estradiol, you're going to have too much testosterone in that case. Well, once you have too much testosterone and not enough estrogen, I'm going to say estrogen, but in this case, we're talking about estradiol, because you're going to hear me talk about estrogen dominance, and that's a different related thing. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that's all very much a concern of mine, that term is thrown around and people don't know what it really means. So if you have too much testosterone, it sets in sequence a whole bunch of different events in the body. Like, it's going to affect your gut microbiome, just having too much testosterone. And as well, when you don't have enough estradiol, that's like the perfect storm of altering your gut microbiome. And when you have a lot of testosterone circulating, they've actually shown that the gut microbes actually start making more testosterone. It's like an amazing thing. They've shown that if you do a fecal transplant from a male to a female, they actually start having more testosterone. There's something about the gut microbiome that has an impact on just making. So the more testosterone you have, the more you're going to seemingly make, and that the gut microbiome seems to have some control in that. Now, once you have the leaky gut or the impaired gut barrier, you're having this dysbiotic group of microbes coming into the body. So think of it like a chronic infection. We don't always think about it that way, but it really should be, because you have these abnormal microbial life forms, often bacteria, could even include viruses and even fungi, and they get into the body between the lining cells of the gut. That's the barrier. And lining the gut is the gut-associated lymphoid tissue. That's where 70% of all the immune cells line the gut of the body. That's just where they're all concentrated. So when you have this bacterial, I'll call it bacterial invasion, coming through the gut into the body proper, those immune cells react as if you're having an infection, like some kind of virus or bacteria is trying to invade. And they do what they're designed to do. They create an inflammatory response to try to kill the invaders. Well, now you're having a circulation of inflammatory products, and inflammation, because it's not going to just be local in the gut. It will be in the gut too. And that's one of the triggers for developing fatty liver. But these immune cells can circulate throughout the body. And so can this bacteria that's getting through the gut. We call that endotoxemia, where the bad bacteria coming through between the cells of the lining of the gut can actually circulate. And that's what I just said, endo, like from within, toxic, and emia is through the blood. So now you have all of this toxic stuff circulating and the immune system responding. When you have systemic inflammation, the body's response is to upregulate the enzyme aromatase, which doesn't just exist in the ovary, but it's different when it's in different parts of the body. And it turns out that in other parts of the body, it can work just fine. Well, what is the biggest accumulation of the enzyme aromatase? It's actually in adipose tissue, fat tissue. So now you're upregulating this enzyme that can convert androgens, not just testosterone from the ovary, but androgens, most of which are derived from the adrenal gland, like DHEAS and DHEA. They're actually the most abundant of all the steroid hormones in the body, and they're androgens. So they're like have a male-like effect, but men have them and women have them. And these androgens are converted into estrogens in fat tissue because of this high level of inflammation that turns on like high mode, this enzyme. And so now from the precursor androgens from the adrenal, like DHEAS and DHEA, they are converted not into estradiol, but into estrone. Remember, I told you estrogen is not a hormone. It's a family of hormones. Estradiol, the one made by the ovaries, has a symbol, a big E, like for estrogen, and the number 2. That's estradiol. Estrone, which has a big letter E and the number 1, is a different form of estrogen. And that is what is made when you have fat tissue converting adrenal androgens into estrogens. It's converted into estrone. Well, it turns out that high amounts of inflammation, which are prevalent now throughout society and in generally obese people, but even more so in women with PCOS, because they have like a double whammy kind of a situation. But when you have high levels of estrone, they act differently in the body than estradiol. Estradiol is the only estrogen that has a balanced effect on all the estrogen receptors. There's multiple, like 3 kinds, and then variations of even them. There's alpha, beta, and a membrane, but even they have some variants. And estradiol has a balanced effect on all of these estrogen receptors. Estrone binds to the alpha. Well, it turns out that alpha is like the on switch for inflammation, and estradiol operates the on and the off switch so that you can have inflammation when you need to have it. Like if you're injured or actually have a real infection, then you turn on inflammation, but then you want to turn it off and go into resolution phase and healing. But estrone, it just turns it on. So you've got the on switch, but you don't have the off switch. So it exacerbates the inflammatory state. And people just assume estrogen is estrogen when that's not true. So inflammation can create this overproduction of estrone, which then aggravates the inflammatory state. And so that's not the same as having proper production of estrogen, estradiol from the ovaries. And it gets all confused. And then people use the term estrogen dominance. But what they're really talking about is the inflammatory trigger to fat tissue producing estrone from the androgen precursors. And I was saying that when you have a lot of inflammation, the estrone and estradiol can go back and forth between one and the other. But when you have a lot of inflammation, the enzyme that converts estrone into estradiol is down regulated. So it's like somewhat in an off mode, so that the estrone that's produced from the androgens from the adrenal gland gets stuck as estrone. So you have an overabundance of estrone in the body, but you don't have enough estradiol. And so your body gets stuck in a even more pro-inflammatory effect and status. So you can see why if you talk about estrogen dominance, but you don't distinguish what estrogen, why is this happening? And then you start thinking that estrogen from the ovaries that a normal, healthy, reproductively fertile woman would make, that somehow there's something wrong with that estrogen when that's the lifeline. That's like the life hormone. So it's really important to make these distinguishing like characteristics about estrogen widely recognized. So it would be like everything that's bad about trans fat is then like put on the reputation for omega-3 or olive oil kinds of, monounsaturated fats. They're in the same family, but it's like the evil twin that gives the bad reputation to the good twin. That's not to say that estrone is evil. When you have an imbalance, it becomes evil. When things are right in the world and you have a fertile woman, she's going to have estrone in her body, but it's not going to be like produced in heavy amounts by the fat tissue. It's going to be balanced from what she makes from her ovaries, converted back and forth between estradiol and estrone. So it's not evil, but when you have too much of it, it kind of does become evil.
That was an amazing explanation. And I feel like, people think there's one testosterone, there's one progesterone. There should just be one estrogen, and it should be called estrone dominance.
Yes, please.
Dominance. So let's coin that term.
All right. Let's change it forevermore.
There's, I talk a lot about the importance of liver health and detoxification. And I take a lot of my my clients through liver flushes a couple times of the year, especially now because of all the things that we're talking about. Can you touch on the importance of liver health and PCOS or hormonal imbalance in general?
Oh, well, the liver is the most incredible organ. It's a manufacturing center for various different proteins, binding proteins like sex hormone binding protein. It's the detoxification premier center of the body. And, it's just an incredible organ that is not embraced and respected enough. And it's very interlinked with gut health. Then we even have a term called enterohepatic circulation. Entero is the gut and hepatic is the liver and the circulation. So there's tremendous linkage. When you have the right bacteria and you have the right diet that provides the proper fibers and you have the right microbes, you make what are called short chain fatty acids. These are fermentation metabolic products. Okay, so they're made by the action of the microbes on the fibers and converts them into these short chain fatty acids. And some of these actually connect directly with receptors that go into the vessels and the nerves that feed into the liver and control a lot of liver health. In addition, there are receptors on the vagus nerve, which is part of the autonomic nervous system. The vagus nerve controls what's called the parasympathetic part, which is what should be the status quo when you're not being traumatized or in a major stressed state. It should be the natural, like, baseline state of calmness, of good motility of the gut, of everything kind of working right, not having a heartbeat that's crazy fast or arteries that are all constricted and getting in like hypertension. But if you don't have the right gut microbiome and you don't make the right, or have the right diet, you don't make these short chain fatty acids, particularly butyrate, which can bind to the receptors specifically somehow evolved on the vagus nerve, then you won't have proper parasympathetic output. And that keeps gut motility moving properly, and that connects with proper, so you don't have SIBO, overgrowth of bacteria or fungus in the small intestine, maintaining a healthy gut microbiome, which will totally interconnect with liver health and total body inflammation as well. Because when you don't have enough what we call vagal tone, you go into a more of a stressed state, and then everything becomes sort of in disarray, including the liver. And we know that part of detoxification, this is a total team effect. So we have like different phases of detoxification. And phase 1 starts in the small intestine, and then you have phase 3, and you have phase 4, and they're like in the liver, and then you have a whole estrobolome. You have in the intestine a whole group of microbes just designed to metabolize estrogen. It's all completely interconnected. When you have one thing out of whack, like you don't have the right food, you don't have the right sleep, which can affect the autonomic nervous system. You don't have the right hormonal balance. You have disarray, and then you have altered gut motility, which can give you constipation or diarrhea, which we often call like irritable bowel syndrome, which can be like we write IBS/D for diarrhea, or C or M for mixed. And all of this is really interconnected with your hormones and your gut and your liver. So this is like a unit. You have to think of it as not isolated organs. These are all interconnected, and the short chain fatty acids produced by the microbes affect liver health, and liver health in turn affects, of course, how you detoxify, and how you detoxify affects everything. Because if you have circulating toxic chemicals that you can't get rid of, it's like totally like a big mess up for the whole body. It's really amazing. Back way thousands of years ago, the Chinese understood, for example, that Parkinson's disease is a disease of the liver. And people would laugh at that. It's like, what are they talking about? What does the liver have to do with Parkinson's? That's a neurological disease involving the brain. Well, now we know when you don't properly detoxify, which is predominantly done in the liver, then you have toxins that circulate and get into the brain and can predispose to Parkinson's disease. There's not one part of the body that isn't affected by the liver. And when you have systemic inflammation, gut dysbiosis, you're going to have liver inflammation. And that's going to progress into what we now call steatosis, which is the new term for fatty liver. But when you, like what you mentioned, when you have fatty liver, you don't just have fatty liver, you have fatty pancreas, you have fatty heart, you have fatty muscles. So nothing in the body is going to be working properly. And the liver is just, we should just bow down and respect the liver and realize that we cannot have foods and medicines. I just want to throw out that the number one cause of acute liver failure is actually overdosing, and not intentionally overdosing, on acetaminophen, which is like thrown around like it's nothing. Like, oh, just go take some acetaminophen, brand name Tylenol. Okay. Yeah. That's the number one cause of acute liver failure. And liver transplants, the number one cause now is the fatty liver, the steatosis. And it's no longer due to drug, hepatitis, that's or even alcoholic liver disease. It's number one, this metabolic disease of fatty liver.
what you're saying is hitting home, because I have a family member whose liver doctor has put them on steroids to lower their AST and ALT count, but won't let her take liver supporting cleansing supplements. And liver doctors think that all supplements are bad. And so anyway, I just love what you said. I'm going to have her listen to this. But you got to live your liver. And I love that you said that it affects everything in your body,
Yeah.
that organ. And it's under so much burden now in our modern day society with the toxins, the GMOs. It's hard to eat food that is real food anymore. And we haven't even gotten into processed foods. I want to touch on the good news for all of us who have or had PCOS. You talk about the ancestral reason
Oh, yes.
that our bodies have PCOS. And when I heard you talk about this, I'm like, yes, there's some good news. And I actually love that part of me that you talk about. So why don't you tell everybody the good news of PCOS?
Well, this is the belief that that little problem, and in this case, the ancestral woman, we'll call her Jane, your ancestor, PCOS lady, she had a little genetic defect in the conversion of testosterone into estradiol in her ovaries, but it was a very small defect. So she could still make totally adequate amounts of estradiol. But because of this, she may have been slightly less fertile. So maybe instead of having 8 children, she had 4, which is actually a survival advantage, because every time a woman would become pregnant and have a baby, that's life-threatening. If we go back to, this is today too, unfortunately, for so many women, it's a dangerous situation. It's a stress test for women. But back in prehistoric times, it was a big deal. And, not every woman survived her delivery. So the more times a woman went through pregnancy, the more depleted she came out of it, because the little babies would steal all her minerals and so on. And then, she just had to raise them all. And that would be problematic for time and effort. So it was actually an advantage, like a little built-in contraception. And because she had that little bit of defect in converting testosterone to estradiol, she would have a little higher level of testosterone compared to the average woman. And in fact, they've tested Olympic gold medalist women and found that many of them have this sort of ancestral version of PCOS, that they naturally make a little bit more testosterone. And this was and is and can be an edge when you embrace it. It made those women the leaders of their tribe. They were like braver. They were more outgoing. They weren't like pushovers, they were going to stand up for their rights. And they were the dominant women of their tribe. So it was an advantage to have PCOS. And the reason it's such a problem and totally an epidemic now worldwide is because of all the things that you alluded to, the changes in diet, these ubiquitous endocrine disruptors, these xenoestrogens and other kinds of endocrine disruptors for melatonin and testosterone and thyroid. There's just like a boatload of them that can interfere with every aspect of hormonal functioning. And because of the change in our circadian rhythm, like now we're getting exposed to too much light at night. We're not outdoors enough. We don't get natural sunlight. We have too much of a sedentary lifestyle. So basically in nuts and bolts, it's like the Western lifestyle is just totally terrible for women who have this little inborn error of conversion of their testosterone into estradiol. It's taking what is an advantage and turning it on its head, because it's adding in all of these other problems. So by understanding that we women with PCOS were destined really from our genetic makeup to be the leaders, to be the dominant women, to be of the tribe, to be the most successful women in our group, that we have to reclaim our heritage. And if we adapt the healthiest of lifestyles, and yes, you have to work harder. You have to eat a cleaner diet. You have to eat more vegetables, more fiber. You have to exercise harder. You can't break the rules and just stay up until 2 a.m. on a regular basis. You have to get a set sleep regimen. You have to get sunlight. You just have to work on stress, because we as PCOS women tend to have more autonomic dysregulation, less parasympathetic output, which is the calming, and more of the stress part, which is the sympathetic output. So we have to work harder. Everyone needs all their lifestyle. They have to eat the right foods. They have to exercise. They have to live with our beautiful sun and moon and get outside and work on stress and just avoid chemicals, get air and water purifiers as much as humanly possible, eat organic, and avoid, confined feedlot animal foods and that sort of thing. Yes, if you have PCOS, you have to work harder, but your ancestral origins are talking to you. You just have to listen, and you can get back to where you were destined to be thousands of years ago as the leader of the tribe, the woman with the most self-esteem, not the least.
I love this, and I love testosterone. It's the hormone that gets me out of bed. It builds muscle. It burns fat. There's some really good parts. You just said you put everything in balance, and we are out of time. We are definitely going to have to have you come back because you're such an amazing wealth of knowledge, and you explain things so clearly, which is a true gift. So thank you for that. Where can people find you? How can they find your books and work with you?
Well, all of my books are on Amazon and barnesandnoble.com, but Amazon is always easiest, right? And I am an old-fashioned doctor. I still have an office in Irvine, California, where I see patients every single day, except if I'm traveling, but most of the time I'm here. And I do an Instagram Live, which I'm trying to get out every week and get a lot of materials on YouTube. So I'm pretty out there now. I'm trying to like spread knowledge, because it's really one of my missions now, is to try to make every woman have the knowledge available to her to optimize her life and take charge as much as she can of her own destiny.
Wonderful. Well, you're doing that. So everyone, you heard it. Please share this with all of your daughters, your mothers, and your female friends. Thank you, Dr. Gersh. I really appreciate you coming on. And you were so right as far as you cannot be sitting back on your health today. You have to be proactive. You have to sleep. You've got to eat. I've put together the accelerated food guide that you can follow. You just need to eat organic and get rid of those processed foods. That's step one. Start drinking clean water and move your body. There are other steps you can take, and you can follow me in my group coaching. Make sure you check out Dr. Gersh on Instagram and her books. They're phenomenal. Thank you so much. And thank you for tuning in. If you are overwhelmed, you don't know where to start, you can feel free to reach out to me through my website, sarabantahealth.com. Happy to put together a protocol for you, and join my free group coaching on Telegram. There's no downside. Ask your questions. I share daily tips and tools to improve your health, answer your questions, and you will be surrounded by an amazing group of people who are on a similar path. That information is on my website as well, sarabantahealth.com. And don't forget to follow me on social media at Accelerated Health Products. You can catch this podcast on over 100 platforms, including Spotify, iTunes, and iHeartRadio. Just search Accelerated Health TV and Radio Show. I'm on a mission, and I need your help to share my healing message with everyone who's ready to listen. Share this podcast with a few of your female friends, family members, moms, daughters, whoever needs to hear this. And remember, I'm live every Monday and Tuesday. I post a third podcast on Thursdays, and you can use coupon WELCOME10 to get 10% off site-wide at acceleratedhealthproducts.com. Thanks again for joining us here, and have a great week.